Graceland is a large white house sitting on about 14 acres of land in Memphis, Tennessee. Elvis Presley bought it in 1957 when he was just 22 years old. At the time, he was already one of the most recognized names in American music. He needed a place that could give him some privacy, but also a place that felt like home. Graceland became both of those things for him. The house sits on Elvis Presley Boulevard, which was known as Highway 51 South at the time he moved in. It is not hidden away on some remote property far from people. It sits close to the road, and that made it accessible in a way that many celebrity homes were not. Fans could drive by, stop their cars, and stand just outside the property line. Many of them did exactly that, and they kept doing it year after year. From the early days of his fame, Elvis had a relationship with his fans that was different from most entertainers. He came from a working-class background in Tupelo, Mississippi. He grew up without much money, and he understood what it felt like to be an ordinary person. Even after he became famous, he did not forget where he came from. That background shaped how he treated the people who admired him. The gates of Graceland became a well-known gathering spot over the years. Fans would travel from different states and sometimes from other countries just to stand outside those gates. Some of them hoped to catch a glimpse of Elvis coming or going. Others simply wanted to feel close to a place that meant something to them. For many people, just standing at those gates felt like enough. Children were always part of the crowd that gathered there. Some came with their parents, who were fans themselves. Others were young people from the Memphis area who had grown up hearing about Elvis and were curious about the man who lived in that big house down the road. For these children, Graceland was almost like a landmark in their own neighborhood. It was part of the city they knew. Elvis was aware that people gathered outside. He did not ignore it. There were times when he would come out to the gate and talk to the fans standing there. He would sign autographs, shake hands, and have short conversations. The people who were there on those days considered themselves very lucky. It was not something that happened on a schedule. It happened when Elvis felt like coming out, and nobody knew in advance when that would be. The staff at Graceland over the years have shared many stories about how Elvis handled the fans at the gate. He was not someone who looked at them as an inconvenience. He understood that those people standing outside had genuine affection for him, and he respected that. There were days when he was tired or not feeling well, but he still made the effort to acknowledge the people who had come to see him. For the children who visited the gates, the experience was different from what the adults felt. Adults understood the cultural significance of Elvis. They knew his music, his films, and his history. Children simply saw a man who was kind to them. They did not need to understand everything about his career to feel the warmth he showed when he stepped outside and spoke to them directly. Memphis itself played a role in all of this. It is a city with deep musical roots, and Elvis was its most famous son. The people of Memphis had a personal connection to him that fans in other places did not have in the same way. For local families, taking their children to see the gates of Graceland was something natural. It was part of growing up in that city during those years. The gates became more than just an entrance to a private property. They became a place where ordinary people felt a connection to someone extraordinary, and occasionally that connection became something real, because Elvis would come outside and make it real. Those were the moments that stayed with people. Those were the moments nobody forgot. Elvis Presley was known to spend a lot of time inside Graceland. He kept unusual hours, often staying up through the night and sleeping during the day. His life inside the house was relatively private, but he was always aware of what was happening on his property and near its edges. The people around him, his staff and close friends, have described him as someone who paid attention to the small details of his surroundings, even when others might not have noticed them. On one of those ordinary days at Graceland, something caught his attention. Outside the gates, a child was singing. It was not a performance put on for attention. The child was simply singing, the way children do when they are comfortable and not thinking about who might be listening. The voice carried through the air and reached Elvis where he was inside or near the front of the property. He heard it, and he stopped what he was doing. This kind of moment was not something that could be planned or arranged. It happened naturally, the way many of the most memorable things in life tend to happen. A child outside a gate, singing without any expectation that anyone important was listening.
And inside, one of the most famous musicians in the world hearing that voice and deciding it was worth his attention. Elvis had a deep connection to music from a very early age. He grew up singing in church in Tupelo, Mississippi. Music was not just a career for him, it was something personal, something that went back to his earliest memories. When he heard someone singing, even a child singing casually outside his home, it connected with something genuine inside him. He was not just a performer who sang for audiences. He was someone who truly loved the sound of a human voice carrying a song. The decision he made next said a great deal about who he was. He did not send a staff member outside to see what was going on. He did not ignore it and go back to whatever he had been doing. He got up and walked toward the gate himself. That choice, small as it might seem, was not something every person in his position would have made. Many people who reach that level of fame begin to put distance between themselves and the world outside. Elvis did the opposite in that moment. When he reached the gate, he saw the child. The child had not come there specifically to perform for Elvis or to get his attention. Children who gathered near the gates of Graceland came for different reasons. Some came with family members who were fans. Some came out of curiosity. Some came just because Graceland was a recognizable place in Memphis and they found themselves nearby. This child had been singing simply because that was what felt natural in that moment. Seeing Elvis walk out was something the child was not prepared for. For a young person standing outside that gate, having the man who lived inside actually come out and approach them was not an ordinary experience. Elvis was a figure they had likely heard about from family or seen on television. And now he was walking toward them, not as a distant image on a screen, but as a real person closing the distance between them. What made this moment different from a typical fan encounter was the reason Elvis came outside. He was not fulfilling an obligation or following a routine. He came out because a child's voice had genuinely moved him enough to act on it. That is a meaningful distinction. It meant that the child, without knowing it, had created something real. The singing had reached him not as noise from outside, but as something worth responding to. The people around Elvis who witnessed moments like this one have said that he had a particular softness when it came to children. He never spoke down to them or treated them as less important than the adults around them. When a child had his attention, that child had all of it. That was the kind of person who was now standing at the gate looking at a child who had simply been singing and had no idea what was about to happen next.
When Elvis reached the gate and saw the child standing there, he did not make it a big occasion. He did not call attention to himself or make the moment feel larger than it was. He simply came outside and was present. That was something people who spent time around Elvis often remarked on. When he gave someone his attention, it did not feel like a celebrity encounter. It felt like a conversation between two people. He spoke to the child in a calm and easy way. He asked simple questions. What is your name? Where do you live? How old are you? These were not questions designed to impress anyone or to fill time before moving on. Elvis was genuinely curious about the people he met. He had grown up as an ordinary person in a small town, and that part of him never left. He knew how to talk to people without making them feel small or nervous. The child, who had not expected any of this, began to feel comfortable. That was the effect Elvis had on people when he was being himself. His manner was relaxed and natural. He did not stand at a distance or keep things formal. He made people feel that they were welcome in the conversation, that their presence was not an inconvenience. For a child who had simply been singing outside a famous gate, that kind of warmth from someone like Elvis was something completely unexpected. Elvis asked the child to sing again, not in a way that felt like a test or an audition, but in the way that someone asks when they genuinely want to hear something. He had heard the voice from inside and it had brought him outside. Now he wanted to hear it up close. The child sang for him and Elvis listened. He did not talk over it or let his attention drift. He listened the way a person listens when music means something to them. When the song was finished, Elvis responded with encouragement. He told the child that they had a good voice. He said it simply and directly, without exaggerating or turning it into something that felt rehearsed. People who knew Elvis have said that he did not give empty compliments. When he told someone they were talented, he meant it.
For a child to hear that from Elvis Presley, a man who had spent his life surrounded by music and musicians, was not a small thing. It was the kind of words that stay with a person. He spent time with the child that day. He did not rush the moment or check the time. The people around Elvis were used to seeing him do this. When something or someone caught his genuine interest, he gave it his full time. The child was not being handled or managed. Elvis was simply there, in the moment, with no particular agenda other than to connect with the small person standing in front of him. There were gestures of kindness during that visit. Elvis was well known for giving things to people he met, not to show off, but because giving came naturally to him. Whether it was a small gift, a signed item, or simply the sustained gift of his time and attention, he made people feel that the encounter had meant something to him as well. The child left that day with more than just a memory. There was something tangible to hold on to, something that could be looked at later and used to confirm that it had all really happened. What the child experienced that day was not the performance version of Elvis. It was not the man on stage with the lights and the crowd. It was a quieter version, a man who had heard something he liked and had walked outside to say so. That version of Elvis was the one that people who met him personally tended to remember most clearly. The stage presence was impressive, but the private kindness was what made people feel that they had truly met him. The child went home that day changed in a quiet way. Not changed dramatically, but changed in the way that a genuine act of kindness changes a person when they are young. It plants something, and whatever was planted that day stayed rooted for the rest of that child's life. Years passed after that day at the gate. The child grew up, moved through school, built a life, and became an adult with their own responsibilities and their own story. But through all of that, one memory stayed clear. Not the memory of a concert or a television appearance or an album playing on the radio. The memory of a man who had heard them singing and had walked outside to listen. That kind of memory does not fade the way ordinary memories do. It stays because it was connected to a feeling, and feelings last longer than facts. This is something that came up repeatedly in accounts from people who met Elvis in personal, unplanned moments. They did not remember the meeting simply because he was famous. They remembered it because of how he made them feel during those few minutes. He had a way of making the person in front of him feel that they were the most important person in that moment. For a child, that experience is especially powerful. Children are often told to be quiet, to wait, to step aside. Elvis did the opposite. He stepped outside and made room for them. The child, now grown, would tell the story over the years to family members and friends. It was not a story told to impress people or to claim a connection to a celebrity. It was told because it was true and because it had meant something real. The details stayed intact over time. What Elvis said, how he looked, the way he listened, the way he spoke. These things had been stored carefully in memory, because the mind holds on to moments that carry emotional weight. Elvis Presley passed away on August 16, 1977, at the age of 42. His death was a significant moment for people around the world who had grown up with his music. For the child who had stood at the gate that day, the news would have carried a personal weight that most people around them could not fully understand. They had not just lost a public figure, they had lost someone who had once stood in front of them and listened to them sing. That is a different kind of loss. After his death, the stories about Elvis the person began to surface more consistently. People who had met him, worked with him, or simply crossed his path began to share what they remembered. And the pattern emerged across those stories. The same qualities appeared again and again. His generosity, his ease with ordinary people, his genuine interest in those around him, and his particular tenderness toward children. The story of the child at the gate fit naturally into that larger picture of who he was when the cameras were not on him. Graceland was opened to the public in 1982, 5 years after his death. It became one of the most visited private homes in the United States. People came from everywhere to walk through the rooms, see the grounds, and stand at those famous gates. For many visitors, the gates were not just an entrance to a museum. They were a reminder that Elvis had once stood on the other side of them and chosen to come out. That choice, repeated across many years and many encounters, said something important about his character. The story of the child singing outside the gate is one among many similar stories, but each one of those stories matters individually, because each one represents a real person whose life was touched in a lasting way. Fame is often measured by record sales, concert attendance, and cultural influence. Those numbers are real and they tell one part of the story. But the other part is told in memories like this one, in the accounts of ordinary people who found themselves standing near Elvis for a brief moment and never forgot it. What Elvis gave that child was not complicated. It was attention, time, and genuine kindness. He heard a voice, he responded to it, and he treated the person behind that voice with respect and warmth. That is not a grand gesture. It is a simple human one. But simple human gestures, when they come from a place of sincerity, are the ones that last a lifetime. That child never forgot. And as long as the story is told, neither will anyone else.